We all dream of standing up to injustice, of challenging overwhelming power. But how many of us would actually do it, especially when the odds mean certain death? This video plunges you into the heart of ancient Rome to reveal the gladiator who did just that. Discover the incredible human spirit that fueled his impossible defiance against an emperor, and how his courage echoes through history. The Roman Empire, a name that still carries the weight of absolute authority. 2,000 years ago, it was more than just a civilization. It was an idea that shaped the world. From the marble halls of its palaces to the dusty edges of its provinces, everything bowed to one will, the emperor's. His word was law, his command was fate. To defy him was to vanish from history itself. But beneath the grandeur, beneath the shining gold and towering statues, lay another Rome, one built on blood, fear, and the spectacle of survival. The Colosseum, that massive arena of stone, was not just entertainment, it was control. It was how the empire reminded its citizens who held the power and who did not. The crowd cheered as men fought for their lives. Some were slaves, some prisoners of war, others simply condemned to die for the amusement of tens of thousands. Every drop of sweat, every clash of steel, was a message to the people watching. This is Rome, and you are small. Among those countless faces forced into the sand, one gladiator would rise. He was not a nobleman, not a general, not even a free citizen. Yet his act would ripple through time, echoing far beyond the roar of the crowd that once called for his death. But before his defiance, before his courage burned into legend, we must understand the world that tried to break him. In the early years of the 1st century, Rome was unstoppable. Its legions marched from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Germania. Its ships ruled the Mediterranean like wolves on water. At its center stood the emperor, the living embodiment of Rome's might. To the people, he was more than a ruler. He was a god among men. His face appeared on every coin. His statues towered above every market square. His name began and ended every public prayer. The empire revolved around his presence, an illusion of perfection that no one dared question. Power, after all, survives not on truth, but on fear. For the common people, life was survival. Bread and games. That was the promise of Rome. As long as the emperor fed the masses and entertained them, the empire stayed calm. And the greatest entertainment of all was the gladiatorial games. The Colosseum was not just an arena, it was the empire's mirror. Inside its vast circle of stone, the values of Rome were stripped bare. Strength was everything. Mercy was weakness. The crowd did not come to see men fight. They came to see Rome's authority reaffirmed. Life and death decided by the flick of an imperial thumb. Beneath the arena floor was a labyrinth of tunnels, cages, and chambers. There, in the dim light of torches, men waited for their turn to face destiny. You could hear the murmurs of prayers, the scrape of metal, the slow rhythm of breath before chaos. To the world above, they were nameless. To each other, they were brothers in suffering, and among them was one man, the one history almost forgot. He was not born in Rome. He was captured in a border conflict, far from the city's heart. Once, he had a family, a small farm, a quiet life. But Rome took that away. He was sold, trained, and remade, a weapon for the amusement of the powerful. The empire called him a gladiator, but his heart refused to accept that name. For months, he fought in the minor arenas, surviving when others fell, not because he loved violence, but because he refused to let Rome break him. Each fight, each wound, was another reminder. He was still alive, still human, even when the empire wanted him to forget. When the emperor announced his grand games, a festival to celebrate his 10th year in power, the city erupted in excitement. Banners hung from marble arches. The streets filled with parades, music, and chants of Ave Caesar. But for the men in the cells below, it meant something else. The bloodiest spectacle Rome had ever seen. the emperor wanted more than a show. He wanted proof of his dominion. Every victory in the arena, every scream from the crowd would feed his pride. To the people, he was the bringer of glory. To the gladiators, he was death wearing a crown. Our gladiator, unnamed by history, but remembered in spirit, was chosen for the main event. He did not know it yet, but destiny had already written his part. This was not just another fight. This was a moment that would test the very limits of human courage. In the hours before dawn, as the city slept beneath the glow of oil lamps, the gladiators were awakened. Their armor was polished, their weapons inspected. The trainers barked orders. The guards watched with cold indifference. Outside, the rumble of thousands gathering grew louder with every passing minute. Our gladiator stood silent, eyes fixed on the small window of light that pierced the stone wall. It wasn't fear that filled him. It was clarity. He knew the truth now. No matter how skilled he was, no matter how strong, he was never meant to win. The emperor would not allow it. This was not about battle. It was about spectacle. His fate was already decided. But something within him refused to bow. He remembered his home, the sound of his children's laughter, the soil under his hands. He remembered the men who took him, the promises of Rome, the lies. And in that silence before the storm, a thought came. A thought so dangerous, so impossible, that it almost made him smile. What if he refused to play their game? The gates opened, and sunlight flooded the tunnels. The roar of 50,000 voices crashed like thunder. The smell of dust, sweat, and anticipation filled the air. Drums echoed across the stone walls as the gladiators entered the arena in a single line, each carrying the weight of 1,000 eyes upon them. At the far end, seated upon a golden throne, was the emperor himself. Draped in crimson robes, surrounded by guards and senators, he watched with a detached smile. To him, these were not men. They were instruments of entertainment. Their deaths meant nothing. Their courage only existed to glorify his name. Trumpets blared. The games began. The early fights were chaos, choreographed brutality, where the illusion of control kept the crowd roaring. The emperor's hand would rise, and a man's fate would follow. Thumbs up or down, life or death decided with casual ease. The people loved it, for in the suffering of others, they found distraction from their own. And then came the final match, the grand spectacle. Our gladiator stepped forward, his opponent already waiting across the sand. The two faced each other in silence. Around them, the noise faded into a dull hum. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. Every heartbeat felt like an echo of destiny. This was it, the moment that would change everything. But not yet. Because before defiance comes awareness. And before rebellion comes understanding of what's truly at stake. The gladiator looked up, his eyes meeting the emperor's. And in that instant, something unspoken passed between them. A silent challenge neither could yet name. The emperor smiled. He saw only another pawn to crush beneath his thumb. The gladiator lowered his sword. He saw something else, a chance to show the world that even the smallest man can defy a god. The crowd waited, eager for the clash. The announcer shouted the names, the trumpets flared, and the drums rolled like thunder. But within the gladiator's mind, there was only stillness. No fear, no noise, only a quiet, burning determination. He had lived long enough to know what awaited him. But death, he realized, was not the greatest punishment. The greatest punishment was to die without meaning. And so he decided, if this was to be his end, it would not be on Rome's terms. It would be on his. As the signal to begin echoed across the arena, the gladiator tightened his grip on his sword. Around him, the cheers grew deafening. The emperor leaned forward, sensing something unusual in the air. This was no ordinary battle. This was the first heartbeat of rebellion. And soon, Rome would hear it echo louder than it ever imagined. The sound of the trumpet cut through the air, sharp and final. The crowd roared, their voices colliding like a wave against the stone walls of the Colosseum. In that vast circle of sand, two men stood frozen in a moment that seemed to stretch across eternity. The emperor leaned forward on his throne, his eyes bright with amusement. This was his stage, his masterpiece of control. But what he could not see, not yet, was that one of his actors had stopped following the script. The gladiator took a single step forward, his sword heavy in his hand. The sunlight struck the edge of his blade, flashing for a heartbeat before dimming again. His opponent, a tall fighter with scars across his chest, shifted his stance. They were supposed to fight. They were supposed to bleed for the Empire. But something in the air had changed. Something in the gladiator's gaze told the other man that this fight was not about survival. It was about something greater. The drums began again, echoing through the arena. The first strike came fast, steel meeting steel with a metallic cry. The crowd erupted, rising from their seats. To them, it was another battle, another spectacle. They could not see the storm building behind the gladiator's eyes, the quiet rebellion taking shape in his soul. He moved with precision, each strike measured, each movement calm. He was not fighting for the emperor's pleasure anymore. He was fighting for his own truth. Minutes passed like hours. Dust rose in golden clouds beneath their feet. Sweat ran down his back, his breath steady and focused. He could hear the shouts, the gasps, the rhythmic chant of the crowd calling for death. But he did not listen. His opponent faltered, stepping back. The gladiator could have ended it right there, with one clean strike. But instead, he stopped. The crowd fell silent, confused. Even the emperor leaned back, his amusement fading into curiosity. What was this? A hesitation? A show of mercy? Or something worse? A defiance of command? The gladiator looked up, his gaze meeting the throne high above. For the first time in the history of the emperor's games, a fighter in the arena was not seeking approval. He was staring straight into the eyes of the man who ruled the world, and he did not bow. A murmur ran through the stands. The emperor raised his hand, signaling the fight to continue. The gladiator stood still. His opponent, unsure, looked to the guards, then back at him. The air thickened with tension. Then the gladiator did the unthinkable. He dropped his sword. The metallic clatter echoed through the arena like thunder. The crowd gasped. The guards tensed. For a heartbeat, the entire empire seemed to hold its breath. To drop your weapon in front of the emperor was not an act of mercy. It was an act of rebellion. It was a statement that life, even a doomed one, belonged to you and not to the one sitting on a throne. The gladiator's voice, when it finally came, was steady. He spoke not in Latin, but in the rough tongue of his homeland, a language few understood, but many felt. He said something simple, something that carried more weight than 1,000 swords. No more. The emperor's expression hardened. The crowd erupted in confusion. Some shouted for punishment, others for mercy, but no one understood what they were truly witnessing, the birth of defiance in the heart of empire. Guards began to move, their armor clanking as they descended the steps toward the arena floor. The emperor gestured for silence. His voice, calm and composed, carried across the Colosseum. "Pick up your sword," he commanded. But the gladiator did not move. For a long moment, man and ruler stared at each other. The sunlight shifted across the sand, turning red in the late afternoon glow. The crowd grew restless. The tension was unbearable. And then, slowly, deliberately, the gladiator turned his back on the emperor. The Colosseum erupted. The emperor rose from his seat, his face a mask of fury. No one turned their back on him. Not a senator, not a general, and certainly not a slave. But this man, this nameless gladiator, had done it. The guards surrounded him, their spears ready. The emperor shouted something, but his words were drowned by the chaos of the crowd. Some spectators cheered for the boldness, others screamed for blood. Even among the soldiers, there was hesitation. The gladiator was just one man, yet in that moment, he represented something that terrified even those who held the weapons. Freedom. The emperor motioned again, ordering his men to act. But before they could move, the gladiator spoke once more. His voice carried, calm but unyielding. "You may take my life," he said, "but you will never own my soul." It was not a threat. It was not even anger. It was truth. And truth, in a world built on fear, is the most dangerous weapon of all. The crowd fell silent again. Even the emperor, for a brief instant, hesitated. This was not the spectacle he wanted. This was something else entirely. Something that could spread, something that could make people question the illusion of power. The guards moved forward, but the gladiator did not resist. He simply stood, unarmed, facing the might of Rome. Some say that the emperor ordered his execution on the spot. Others say he was dragged away, vanished into the tunnels beneath the arena, never seen again. History, as written by the victors, erased his name. But legends, carried by whispers, kept his spirit alive. They say that in the following weeks, something strange began to happen in the city. In the markets, people talked about the man who faced an emperor without fear. In the taverns, soldiers argued in hushed tones, wondering what kind of courage that required. And among the slaves and commoners, hope began to stir. For the first time, someone had shown that even under absolute power, a single act of defiance could shake the foundation of an empire. In his palace, the emperor sat alone, surrounded by silence. The celebration had ended, but his mind replayed the moment again and again, the sword falling, the crowd's gasp, the words echoing across the arena. He was the most powerful man in the world, yet for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar. It was not anger. It was fear. Not fear of the man who stood against him, but of what that act represented. If one man could defy him in front of thousands, what would stop others from doing the same? Power, after all, was only real as long as people believed in it. He ordered the records of the event to be sealed. The official story would say the gladiator was a criminal who refused to fight, nothing more. The games continued. The empire marched on. But in the hearts of the people, something had changed. The illusion had cracked. Weeks turned into months, and the story of the rebel gladiator spread far beyond the walls of Rome. In distant villages, children whispered his tale as a bedtime story. In the slave camps, his name became a symbol of silent resistance. Even in the ranks of the Roman army, where loyalty was law, there were murmurs of respect. No one knew his real name. Some called him the Defiant One, others simply the man who stood. What mattered was not his identity, but what he represented, the idea that courage was not about victory, but about standing firm in the face of impossible odds. The emperor's advisors urged him to make an example, to remind the people of their place. But every punishment he ordered only fueled the whispers. The more he tried to silence the story, the louder it became. Because you cannot kill an idea once it takes root in the human heart. In the poorer districts of Rome, murals began to appear. Crude paintings of a man standing in the arena, his weapon lying at his feet, facing the emperor without fear. The guards tried to destroy them, but new ones appeared every night. The people had found their symbol, not of war, not of conquest, but of human dignity. And the emperor, in his palace of marble and gold, found himself haunted by the memory of a slave who had refused to kneel. He tried to fill the void with more games, more conquests, more displays of control. But none of it could erase the truth that his absolute power had been challenged, not by another ruler, but by a man with nothing left to lose. Time passed, and the story of the gladiator began to evolve. Some said he survived, escaping into the wild lands beyond the empire's reach. Others believed he was executed, his final words carried by those who witnessed his act. What mattered most was not the ending, but the meaning behind it. He became a symbol, a myth, a reminder that even in the darkest systems of control, humanity's spirit cannot be fully broken. Every generation that followed retold his story, shaping it in new forms. Poets wrote verses about him. Scholars debated his existence. But the truth, hidden beneath centuries of dust, remained the same. He had defied an emperor and lived forever in memory. The empire that once ruled the world eventually fell. Its monuments crumbled, its emperors forgotten. But the nameless gladiator, the man who stood alone in the arena, still stands in our collective imagination, an eternal echo of courage. Years after the event, a young senator stood before the emperor, hesitant but determined. He spoke of reforms, of fairness, of giving more voice to the people. The emperor, older now, listened quietly. Perhaps he had learned something from that day in the arena. Perhaps he had not. But even within the palace walls, the idea of absolute control no longer felt invincible. Because once a man has seen defiance, he can never unsee it. They would question the records, the motives, the details. But deep down, everyone knew that truth is not always written in ink. Sometimes it survives in the pulse of human memory, passed from one soul to another. Maybe the gladiator was real. Maybe he was many men whose stories merged into one. What matters is that he represents the best of us, the part that refuses to kneel, even when the world demands it. His rise was not about victory, but about awakening. His rebellion was not about destruction, but about reclaiming humanity. And his silence, in that final moment before the guards took him away, spoke louder than any sword ever could. The sound of the crowd still lingered long after the gates of the Colosseum closed. The air carried the ghost of that moment, the fall of a sword, the silence of disbelief, the thunder of awakening. Somewhere beneath the empire's glittering surface, something had cracked. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there, a fracture in the illusion of absolute power. The gladiator's defiance had ended in mystery. Some said he was executed in the tunnels below the arena, his body hidden to erase the shame of his rebellion. Others whispered that sympathetic guards had helped him escape, that he disappeared into the vast wilderness beyond Rome's reach. The truth was uncertain. But what was certain was this: his challenge had already changed the world. In the palace, the emperor sat alone. The same man who once ruled with unshakable confidence now found his hands trembling. Power, he realized, was not about armies or gold. It was belief. And belief, once broken, could never be fully restored. The emperor's advisors urged him to crush the whispers spreading through the city. They suggested new games, new displays of strength, new executions to remind the people of their place. But none of it felt the same. The cheers of the crowd now carried doubt. The laughter of the senators felt hollow. For the first time, the emperor was haunted, not by enemies, but by the memory of one man's stare. The image returned to him every night. A slave standing in defiance, refusing to bow. A sword dropped in the sand. The crowd's silence. The voice that said, "No more." It was not just an act of rebellion. It was a mirror, showing the emperor what he truly was, a man, no more divine than those he ruled. Weeks turned into months, and Rome continued its daily rhythm. Markets opened. Soldiers marched. Senators argued in marble halls. Yet beneath that routine, something subtle but powerful was shifting. People began to talk, quietly at first, then louder. The Gladiators' act had become a story, a legend retold in whispers and songs. The slaves, once resigned to their fate, began to look each other in the eyes with something new, recognition. The common citizens, tired of taxes and endless wars, started questioning why their loyalty was blind. Even the soldiers, sworn to obedience, began to wonder who truly held power, the man on the throne or the countless men who carried his commands. Every empire fears one thing more than rebellion: awakening. Because once the mind awakens, chains lose their strength. And in the heart of Rome, the people were awakening. In the dim corners of taverns and temples, poets began reciting verses about a man who stood without fear. His story spread like fire through whispers, carried by travelers, merchants, and soldiers. Some changed the details, turning him into a nobleman. Others made him a soldier who refused to fight, but the essence remained the same: courage in the face of absolute control. The empire tried to suppress the story. Guards arrested those who spoke too loudly. Scrolls were burned. Performers disappeared. But truth has a way of finding cracks to seep through. Even when silenced, it lives in memory, and memory cannot be chained. A century later, historians would find fragments of inscriptions, crude carvings on stone walls that read simply, "He stood." No name, no dates, just those two words. Because that was all that mattered. Years later, a Roman philosopher wrote in his private journal about the event. He had been in the arena that day as a young boy, watching from the stands beside his father. He remembered the silence when the sword hit the ground, the way even the emperor seemed small for a moment. He wrote, "I did not understand it then, but I felt something shift inside me. I saw that courage does not come from power, but from purpose. I saw that true strength lies in saying no when the world demands obedience." His writings would survive long after the empire fell, carried into libraries and monasteries across continents. Scholars centuries later would quote his words, unaware that they were born from the act of a nameless gladiator who had vanished into history. Close your eyes and imagine it again. The sand beneath your feet, the roar of thousands, the sunlight burning across ancient stone, the emperor watching from above, a symbol of everything you are told to fear. And you, standing in the center, knowing you cannot win, but refusing to kneel. That is the heart of this story. That is what makes it eternal. Because the arena was never just a place in Rome. It is the world we live in, and the choice to stand is still ours. When we think of history, we think of great armies and powerful leaders. But history is often moved by one person who dares to act differently. The Gladiator's stand reminds us that one spark is enough to ignite a change no empire can contain. Maybe that is why his name was never written. Because it was never about him. It was about us. About every human being who feels trapped between obedience and conscience. About the moment when silence feels heavier than fear. He stood, not to win, but to remind the world that victory is not always survival. Sometimes victory is simply refusing to surrender your soul. So as you sit here, centuries away from that moment in the Colosseum, remember this: courage is contagious. One act of defiance can echo through generations. One person's stand can change the course of history. And one voice, calm and steady, can silence an empire. The Gladiator's challenge was unthinkable, but it was also unforgettable. And that is why, even now, long after Rome's fall, we still tell his story. Because deep down, we all hope that when our moment comes, we too will have the strength to stand.